What would you do if you found a barefoot, half-frozen woman standing alone in the Wyoming cold, staring at you like you were the monster chasing her? Would you walk away or bring her home, knowing it might destroy your life? The wind sliced across the plains as Eli Morgan rode the boundary of his land. It was a cruel spring, one that promised warmth but gave only hard frozen mud and long nights. His cabin sat alone in a wide bowl of sage and grass, miles from anyone. He liked it that way. Silence was the only friend he trusted after the war, and after losing Mary and the boy. He was checking the wire fence when he spotted something near the creek. At first he thought it was one of his calves, but as he rode closer, his heart kicked hard. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman. She stood barefoot in the frozen mud, swaying like she might collapse any second. She wore nothing but a thin, torn shift, the kind meant to be worn under a dress. Her hair was tangled with burrs, her feet were bleeding, and her eyes, wide, white, terrified, looked at him like she was seeing death itself. Eli slid off his horse slowly, hands held away from his gun so she wouldn't startle. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from lack of use. She stumbled back, falling to one knee. She tried to keep backing away, her breath coming in hard, broken gasps. The wind whipped her clothes tight against her body, outlining bones instead of curves. She was freezing to death. "You'll die out here," Eli said. He didn't move closer yet. The fear rolling off her was sharp and wild. "My cabin's right over that rise. There's a fire, food. You can come with me or stay here. It's your choice." For a long moment, she didn't move at all. Only the wind moved, scraping across the land. Finally, her shoulders dropped. Defeat, not trust. Eli took off his heavy wool coat and laid it gently over her. She didn't look at him. She just curled into the warmth like she hadn't felt heat in years. When he lifted her, she went stiff, but she was too weak to fight. She weighed almost nothing. He set her on his horse and climbed on behind her, holding her steady against him. She shook so hard he felt it through his shirt. Inside the cabin, he sat her by the fire, letting the heat soak into her frozen skin. She curled into his coat, shaking violently as he set a bowl of thin beef stew in front of her. She stared at it like it might be a trap. But when the smell hit her, hunger won. She devoured it, spilling broth down her chin. Eli gave her another bowl and turned away to give her privacy. She didn't need his eyes on her. Not tonight. When she finally whispered her name, Clara, it was barely a breath. A cracked, broken sound. Eli didn't ask what happened. He had seen enough in the war to know pain when it walked into his home. Asking never changed the truth, and this truth felt dangerous. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." She stared at the bed like it was a trap, too, suspicion warred with exhaustion. Finally, she slid under the quilts, still wearing his coat, curling into the very edge like she expected someone to yank her away. Eli bedded down on the floor, pistol in reach. Not for her, for whatever she was running from. He must have dozed, because the scream ripped him awake like a gunshot. "No! Don't! Get off!" Clara was sitting upright in the bed, eyes wide open but unseeing. She clawed at the log wall, her fingers scraping the wood until they bled. "Clara!" he said sharply. "You're dreaming." She didn't hear him. She thrashed, kicking the quilts away, screaming until her voice cracked. Eli didn't touch her. Not yet. He knew the look of a person trapped in a memory they couldn't escape. She gasped and crumpled back into the mattress, sobbing without sound. Eli's jaw clenched. The fire popped, shadows jumping along the walls. He sat beside the hearth the rest of the night, listening. The nightmares didn't stop. They came again. And again. 5 times before dawn, she screamed like someone was hurting her all over again. The second time, she fought so wildly she fell off the bed. When Eli grabbed her shoulders, she struck him hard in the face, her palm slamming his nose until blood poured down his mouth. The hit seemed to snap her awake. She scrambled to the wall, shaking, horrified at what she'd done. "It's just a dream," he said, pinching the bridge of his bleeding nose. The third time, she cried without waking. The fourth time, she clawed at her own throat like she was trying to tear hands away. By the fifth, Dawn was creeping in, pale and cold. She jerked awake with a small cry, then lay stiff as a board, staring at nothing. Eli stood slowly, every bone aching from the long night. He poured her coffee, placed the cup on the table, and walked out to work, the cold air slamming into his face. 5 times, 5 nightmares, 1 night. That day he chopped wood until the axe handle nearly snapped from the force. He fed the kettle, repaired the fence, all with a silent rage building under his ribs, not at her, but at whatever had carved terror into her bones. When he returned, she was dressed in clothes far too big, cinched with rope. She had washed her face. But her eyes never stopped moving, not for a second. "I need to leave," she whispered without turning. "You won't last a day," Eli said. "You saw the land. There's nothing for miles." "I can't stay." "You ain't in any condition to go." Her shoulders sagged. She looked like a person waiting for a door to break down. A few days passed. She stayed. But every night, the nightmares came. 5 times, sometimes more. Eli barely slept. He moved from bedroll to standing guard without even thinking. He couldn't leave her alone with those ghosts. He started to wake before she screamed. He could hear her breathing change, the tiny catch right before terror seized her. His instincts screamed something else too. This wasn't just fear. This was someone running from a monster who still might come looking. And Eli Morgan was starting to understand one thing. Whoever had hurt her was still out there. What would you do if the woman screaming in your bed every night wasn't just afraid of the past, but of someone still coming for her? Eli Morgan didn't sleep much anymore. Every night he sat by the fire, waiting for Claire's breathing to change, waiting for the panic to grab her again. He didn't comfort easily. He wasn't a soft man, but he learned her patterns, learned the warning signs. He woke just before the terror swallowed her and rushed to her bed. He didn't grab her. He didn't shake her. He set his hands on her shoulders, firm and steady, grounding her back into the world. "Clara," he whispered each time, voice low and certain. "You're safe. You're here. You're in my cabin." Sometimes she would fight him, her fists landing wild and panicked. Sometimes she would curl in on herself, trembling so hard he felt it in his own bones. But always, eventually, she saw him. She saw Eli, not the monster in her dreams. The screams kept coming 5 times a night. But slowly, something in her changed. She began helping with chores. She swept the cabin floor in silence. She collected eggs, flinching at every small sound. She carried wood to the porch, even when her legs shook from weakness. The fear didn't leave her face, but the work steadied her hands. Still, every so often, her eyes would drift toward the horizon, listening, always listening. One morning, Eli found her collapsed near the far fence line, determined to run even though her body had nothing left to give. He carried her back, angry, but not at her. Angry at whatever had carved the terror into her bones. That's when he saw the wound beneath her collarbone, raw and infected, shaped like something burned into her skin. Old scars ringed her wrists, thin white reminders of rope or iron. Eli cleaned the burn with warm water, carbolic salve, and hands gentler than any he'd ever used. She winced but didn't pull away, and when he finished, she whispered the first words she'd spoken in days. Don't lock the door." Eli froze. He always locked the door at night, always. But he saw the terror in her eyes, not fear of something outside, but fear of being trapped inside. He lifted the wooden bar from the door and set it gently on the floor. "It ain't locked," he said quietly. A week passed. One night her voice came from the dark, trembling like a leaf. "Don't let them find me." She wasn't talking in her sleep, she was awake, and that changed everything. From that night on, Eli slept even lighter. He woke before she screamed. He steadied her. He held her. He whispered her name until the fear faded from her eyes. Then something even stranger happened. She started opening up. She told him about the cellar, the dark, the peppermint smell, the chains, the cold mornings where metal froze her skin. Eli didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer comfort. He just sat at the table or by the fire, letting her voice fill the quiet cabin. It was the first time she spoke without being shaken awake. He realized something then. Clara wasn't just afraid. She had survived something meant to destroy her, and whoever did it wasn't done. Days warmed. The frost broke. Eli took her outside and handed her a spade. "We plant these or we don't eat next winter." She learned quickly, digging and dropping seed potatoes. The work blistered her hands, but she never quit. She stopped often to listen, searching the horizon with haunted eyes, but she kept going. One evening by the fire, she whispered. It was a cellar, always dark. He chewed peppermint root. Eli nearly snapped the leather bridle he was mending. His jaw tightened, his knuckles turned white, but he said nothing. He let the silence carry her words instead of crushing them. Night after night, he woke her from terror. Sometimes she clawed. Sometimes she screamed. Sometimes she pressed herself against him and sobbed until her body shook. One night, she collapsed into his chest, weeping so hard Eli didn't know what to do except hold her, awkwardly, tightly, like she was something precious and breaking at the same time. He'd thought he'd buried all the parts of his heart that could feel something like this. But watching her fight for her life every night, it tore open something inside him. Something he thought had died with Mary. He began noticing her in ways he didn't expect, the reddish glint in her hair when the sun hit it, the stubborn line of her jaw when she chopped wood with blistered hands, the way she tried so hard to keep going, even when fear lived in every breath she took. He was falling for her, not out of softness, out of respect, out of shared brokenness. And she was changing too. One morning she asked about the scar on his hand, the jagged burn, the missing skin. "Shrapnel," he said, Gettysburg. "You were a soldier?" "I was." "Is that why you live alone?" "My wife and son." Fever took him. She looked toward the hill where two crosses stood. Her voice softened. "I'm sorry." That night, the cabin felt different. He had shared his pain, and now she wasn't just surviving in his home, she was living alongside him. Then everything shifted. It began with a storm, a black-bellied squall that swallowed the prairie in minutes. Rain blasted the yard. Thunder shook the ground. Eli and Clara ran to the barn to save the horses. Lightning lit her face in bright, sharp flashes. She was breathless, soaked, her hair dripping. And for once, her fear wasn't from the cellar. It was from the storm, and from something else, something alive between them. They stood close, too close. Eli reached for her jaw, brushing water from her cheek. She leaned in. He lowered his head. The kiss was soft at first, trembling and unsure. Then it deepened, hungry, desperate, like two people who had spent too long pretending they didn't need each other. Her cold hands gripped his shirt. His fingers dug into her waist. Their breath tangled. Then, thunder. A loud crash shook the beams. They broke apart, gasping. Before either could speak, Eli heard something over the storm. Hoofbeats. One rider. Then, a voice. A man in a long, yellow slicker riding into the yard. A man looking for someone. A man who changed everything. "Lookin' for a girl," he said. "Name of Clara." From the loft, hidden in the hay, Clara heard the words, and her heart crumpled. He had found her. The past had found her. And for the first time since she arrived, Clara wanted to run. Again, forever. What would you sacrifice for the one person who finally gave you back your life? Rain hammered the barn roof as the rider studied the cabin through the storm. Eli's pistol stayed low, but his thumb rested on the hammer. Clara, hidden above in the loft, pressed both hands over her mouth to stop the sob rising in her throat. "Lookin' for a runaway," the man said. "Name of Clara. Preacher down in Laramie says she stabbed him. Says she's dangerous. $50 reward." Clara's heart cracked, not at the lie, She had expected lies, but at the price. $50. That's all she was worth to the world that had taken everything from her. Eli's voice was cold as the rain. Never heard the name. Wrong ranch. The rider studied him, but Eli didn't blink. At last the man spat and turned his horse. Your funeral if you're lying. He disappeared into the storm. Eli didn't move until the sound of hoofbeats was gone. Then he stepped back into the barn, bolted the door, and looked up. He's gone, he said softly. Clara climbed down the ladder, shaking so hard she could barely stand. He called me. $50, Eli. That ain't who you are, he said, but she didn't believe it. Not then. She fled into the rain, running for the cabin, sobbing. That night the nightmares didn't come, only crying. Quiet, painful sobs that Eli listened to from the floor, his chest tight with helplessness. But by dawn, she was gone. Eli found the empty bed, the door unbarred, a single torn piece of white cloth left on the pillow, a goodbye. He saddled the buckskin in seconds, the reins shaking in his fists. He tracked her to the riverbank where the storm had swollen the creek into a raging brown monster. Clara stood on the edge, her hair whipping in the wind. "Go back!" she cried when she saw him. "They'll kill you! They'll kill you because of me!" And then she stepped into the water. He didn't hesitate, he didn't think. He plunged in after her, cold, hitting him like a hammer. The current grabbed her, pulling her under. "Clara!" he roared, diving. His hand caught her shirt. She fought him, begging him to let her die, but he hauled her to the shore, using strength he didn't know he still had. On the muddy bank she sobbed, shaking, pushing at his chest. "You should have let me go," quote. He grabbed her face in both hands. "You want to die? Not here. Not like this. Not alone." She broke. He carried her home, soaked, frozen, furious, alive. Inside the cabin, he stripped off her wet clothes so she wouldn't freeze, then his own. Not gentle, not slow, necessary. He pulled her against the fire's warmth, wrapped them both in blankets, her cheek against his bare chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. "You're alive," he whispered into her hair. "You hear me? Alive." She kissed him through tears, and he kissed her back, holding her like he'd lose her if he let go. That night changed everything. She didn't run again. But the world didn't forget her. One day, Eli rode into town for supplies and came home with a crumpled, dirty envelope. No return address, just his name. "We know she's there. You'll regret it." Clara went white. "Eli, we have to run." "No," Eli said. "We fight." She shook her head. "You'll die if you stay. I can't let you die for me." So she built a wall, a cold one. She avoided his touch. She slept, facing away from him. She spoke only when she had to. She was pushing him away to save him. It nearly broke him. On the third night, he snapped. "Get up," he said. She turned, startled. "Eli!" "Light the lamp." Confused and afraid, she lit it. The flame filled the room with golden light. Eli unbuttoned his shirt and let it fall to the floor. Her breath caught. His back was a map of old pain, a cattle brand from his father, lash marks from a drive boss, a star-shaped shrapnel wound from the war, burns, knives, scars everywhere. "You think you're the only one broken?" he asked quietly. "You think you're the only one hurt? Look at me, Clara, look." She reached out with trembling fingers, touching the brand, tracing the lash marks. Her eyes filled with tears. "You're not ruined," he said. "Neither am I." And the wall she'd built crumbled. She fell against him crying. He held her. He kissed her, slow and tender. And he made love to her like every scar on her body mattered. 2 days later, 5 armed men showed up. A siege. They fired into the cabin. Eli fought back from behind the trough. Bullets tore through the windows. One burned through Eli's arm, blood pouring fast. Clara dragged him inside, pressed linen to the wound, all while the cabin shook from gunfire. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "Then don't run," he said. Sheriff Brody arrived with a message. The men had a warrant. A hearing in town was the only way to avoid a massacre. Clara wanted to refuse. Eli said no. "This is the fight," he told her. "You stay, you stand. I stand with you." The hearing was brutal. Witnesses lied. They called her wicked, a thief, a sinful temptress. Clara broke on the stand, trembling under the weight of every eye in the room. The judge was ready to hand her over. Then Eli rose. He took off his shirt. He showed his scars. "We're all broken," he said, voice shaking the room, "but broken ain't guilty." And then a new voice spoke. Arthur Sims, brother of the preacher. "My brother, he's a monster," Arthur confessed. She told the truth. The room erupted. Slade and his men ran out under a storm of fury. The judge dismissed the charges and told Eli to leave the county. "We go west," Eli said. And they did. They built a new cabin, a new life, a new beginning. Clara taught women in the valley how to fight, how to read, how to survive. Eli built a home with 2 rooms and carved her name into the porch rail with his own hand. They slept in the same bed every night. When the nightmares came, he held her until they faded. Then, one morning, months later, she grew pale and dizzy over the bread dough. He laid his hand on her stomach and smiled for the first time in a long time. "You ain't sick, Clara," he whispered. "You're carrying our child." She cried in his arms, joy and disbelief tangled in her breath. By fall, her belly was round and full. She rocked on the porch at sunset, watching the valley glow gold, Eli carving a cradle beside her. "Eli?" she asked softly. He looked up. "No one will ever take from us again." She smiled, tears in her eyes. She believed him now, because the fear was gone, completely gone, and in its place was a life she never thought she'd have, a life she finally deserved, a life he would die to protect.